be embarrassed?
You try. I mean, it's happened on occasion. It's just
show up at the fall assembly and you'll see.
Yeah, well, there's that. So yeah, there's Mike, the semi-regular occasional co-host here at Mention and Dispatches. The giggling you're hearing besides Mike is Liz from Beyond Solitaire is back. Howdy, Liz.
Hey, it's good to be back.
And of course, I am Brant, the usual driver of this sort of wreck of a train here. We brought Liz in and Mike back and we'll refer you with a link in this post back to the same show we did last year. But we did the solo Wargaming historical gaming survey last summer and, had a good time with it, but wanted to be able to sort of see how those trends track over time and what happens to people's preferences and favorites and how many more people we can get to fill out this survey. And so this is now the second year that we are doing this, and we're bringing everybody in to talk about this. By the time this article is live, we've already had the wrap-up video that Liz and I did with, it was Mike from One Stop Co-op Shop, and then Paul. Where's Paul's affiliation with?
So Paul's actually just like a free agent. He and I are working on a game together, but he's just the smartest person I know when it comes to talking about games. And so I invite him on stuff because that dude just knows his business.
Okay. I didn't know if he was with a regular site or if he was,
he should be.
So
basically he's like a expert on Renaissance literature who loves heavy games. And he's just the truest heavy gamer I've ever met.
Well, that's very cool. So you can follow the link in this post for this podcast to go watch that video. We've also got the Geek List over on BGG, which I'm sure we'll have tons of people complaining about. Where's my favorite game on the list? Well, because you didn't vote for it. And we'll have people, I never saw a chance to vote for this, despite us putting it in like 5,000 places. We've also got our article up that includes the entire list of games that you can sort of page your way through and see all 420 something of them, 460 something. I mean, we end up with as the total on all of this. We ended up with 446 games total on the list for separate and distinct titles. So out of 200 and some odd responses, that's how many different games were all listed. And we'll have some additional stats deep diving coming up where we're going to do some extra little cross sections of analysis with the data that we're going to play with. And we invite the audience to do the same. If you want to pull down our data set and play with it, great. If you need a copy from us of some of the particular data columns, just ask. Like, we'll send you the ones you're looking for. So if you want to play with how long people have been playing or what their favorite kind of media is and what games they ranked highest and whatever, like, cool, just let us know. We'll share the data because we'd like to see what other people come up with for some number crunching.
Yeah, so let somebody other than Brant do all the number work.
Yeah,
we work him.
It'd be nice. I don't mind the basics. Like I've kind of got a bit of a system down for getting a lot of the basic stuff done. And to that end, with some of the basic stuff, Mike, now that you have seen the list, I was a little late in getting the list to Mike. Mike, now that you've seen the list, you've seen D-Day at Omaha Beach is number one for the second year in a row. And are you the least bit surprised?
Late, and as he just literally 10 minutes ago sent me this. I don't know that I'm surprised to see it. Yeah, I am actually. I guess I am a little bit. It was number one last year. It's number one this year, and it's pretty solid. It's not like it scraped back into the number one position this year.
Yeah.
So, and it's also got a solid lead unless you put all the RAF together, is what Brant figured out from the numbers.
Yeah. So what happened? We asked folks to put the BGG links in to the survey because that allows us to keep the data consistent for exactly which title people are talking about, which edition of the game people are talking about. We don't have to worry about typos. We don't get somebody that just plugs in ASL and like we've got to figure out which ASL title they're talking about. So that's what that led to was a couple of places where we had to make a few judgment calls about different editions of the games and whether or not to combine them. And so for instance, the RAFs, as Liz just mentioned, there's an RAF Battle of Britain, and then there's a second edition publication of it. And from first to second edition, that second edition added both a German module to it, so you can play as the Germans attacking the RAF, and then also added a head-to-head module to it, which is less of an issue for solo gamers, you'd think, unless they're like Mike and schizophrenic and going to play multi-handed.
So much fun.
But we made the judgment call not to combine those two editions because people may have picked the second edition specifically because it had those additional modes in it that the first edition did not. And folks may have picked the first edition because that's the one they actually played and they never even picked up the second edition. So in that case, we chose not to combine them. If we had combined them, the two different editions of RAF Battle of Britain collectively would have jumped Skies Above Britain for number 2 and would have been very close to D-Day at Omaha Beach up at number 1. It wouldn't have overtaken them, but it would have been a lot closer. So that's the backstory that Liz is alluding to there. All right, so top 5. D-Day at Omaha Beach, Skies Above Britain, RAF Battle of Britain 1940, first edition, Pax Pamir second edition, and Fields of Fire. And then Halls of Hegra, Mr. President, B-17 Queen of the Skies, John Company, and Fire in the Lake round out our top 10. Mike, any of those jump out as a surprise?
Maybe Fields of Fire, because I know that one had a rough start, but maybe now I think they've got a new rule book out, a new edition, so maybe that's not so surprising that it's as high as it is still.
Liz, you were jumping in there.
Oh, I was just saying it's such an interesting combo because I'm just surprised and delighted that B-17 Queen of the Skies had a big shoot up the list between last year and this year. Yeah,
we're going to talk about big risers and fallers here in a minute, just because I think there's some interesting things to see in where the big swings were from last year to this year. And again, look, this is a convenient sample of 220 odd wargamers that bothered to fill out the survey for us. So it's not like we can project these findings across the wargame, body as a whole. But
this is true for everyone, Brant. Okay.
Yes. But among the people who filled out the survey, there's some interesting stuff to be found there. So,
Well, Fields of Fire, I think it's surprising for people who don't play Fields of Fire, but it's very clear this game has a huge following of people who are truly devoted to it. Like the average for it is pretty high. Like I feel like if you put enough time into Fields of Fire to actually learn to understand it, then not only is it supposed to be a great game, I need to get those updated rules, baby. But I guess I get the feeling too that like once you've put that much effort into something, you better love it.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing this is Fields of Fire, the first one, and not the second.
Correct. Right? Yeah, this is the original game, and there are some votes. If you scroll further down, you will see some of the other Fields of Fire titles in there. If you give me a second, I can tell you where, as I kind of filter some stuff. But yeah, they are in there. You just have to go looking for them. And that is true of several different series. The Conflict of Heroes series, several of them are in there. ASL, several of them are in there. So it's just a matter of going and taking a look to what you find. Let's go filter on Fields. Come on, folks. We're doing data analysis in real time.
And we're all three doing it on the same spreadsheet online, so it'll probably crash.
Nah, I'm being good. I'm letting Brand do all the work.
I'm not. I'm going to try to get in here and clog up the whole internet.
Yeah. I think there's actually, that may be the only Fields of Fire title on there.
So it was in the 300s last year. That's what I was looking at.
Yeah.
372, Fields of Fire 2.
Yeah. Well, so funny you should mention that. One of the things that I did that I did this year was I went and pulled in, and we're going to publish this with our deep dive stats a little later. But one of the things that I did go and pull, I did the math on the differences between where folks were last year versus where they were this year, just to see what the shift was. And we did have a number of probably about 200 total titles that were new to the list. Now that in some cases they were newly released, so they wouldn't have even been an option for last year. But in a lot of cases, they're just new because either somebody finally got around to playing them or filling out the survey this year. The highest difference jump from last year to this year, Undaunted Normandy jumped 346 places.
Up or down?
Up. These are jumps up. These are not drops. Undaunted Normandy, Picket Duty, kamikaze attacks against U.S. destroyers in Okinawa, Pendragon, Crossing the Line, Aachen 44, Battles of Kursk, Red Star Rising, Jutland, Lost Valley, Siege of Dien Bien Phu. Were all big risers. Those were all the ones that jumped pretty high. In the flip side of that, ones that dropped pretty far. Really what happened with these is last year they had multiple votes. This year they're down to like one vote from one person, pretty far down on the list. W1815, the little quick playing Waterloo game, dropped 364 spots. So that means it was, up in the top 100 last year. Case Blue, Hadrian's Wall, the Mogadishu 1993, and Aracourt all dropped at least 300 spots. Napoleon's Last Gamble dropped 291, and Field Commander Rommel dropped 286. And then after that, we've got some others that dropped. So what I did was I pulled all the ones that either rose or fell at least 200 places. And those are the ones that are in that Stats Deep Dive article.
Do you include the date published with those? Because I would be interested to see the dates that each of those were published.
So that's an interesting
data like Pendragon. Why did Pendragons have a big resurgence this year? Not that it's a bad game. I like Pendragon and I like Morgan, but I would not have predicted a huge jump for that one.
Well, so I wonder if that's not just a function of who filled out the survey, and not that it's any more or less popular than it would have been last year as a solo game. It's just different people filled it out this year.
Yeah. Well, also interesting is that Falling Sky was higher up the list last year than it is this year.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like Roman-ish era, coin games. It's just really interesting to watch them flip. I wonder what happened.
Yeah. I would suspect, like I said, I don't know that it's necessarily a critical reappraisal of the games so much as it is a function of who it was that responded to it this year, or it could even be it was some of the same people, and it's just that's the most recent one they played, so that's the top of their mind.
I mean, I get that. I'm a mood voter in that regard as well. So
yeah, I think it'll be interesting to, like I said, to track over time where things sort of pinball up and down the list, in part depending on who's playing it, in part depending on whether or not there was a recent re-release or an updated version of something, or in the cases of something like the Undaunteds, if there's a new module that comes out for them. Neither of the two most recent Undaunteds, either Battle of Britain or Callisto, wouldn't have really been an option. It wasn't released by the time we were doing the survey, but neither of those were compatible with the original Undaunted series games anyway. So, if they come back with another Undaunted Battle of the Bulge or whatever that is compatible with Normandy and reinforcements and whatever, maybe that causes the Undaunted series to jump up again. Who knows? So it's just kind of a thought. Of the ones that were new to the survey this year, so did not appear last year, I'm going to mispronounce it, but I'm not going to make Liz mispronounce it. The Deccan Empires of Medieval India, Vijayanagara. I'm butchering that. I know I am. Somebody correct my pronunciation.
Everybody always says it really fast. So like the closest approximation I could get is Vijayanagara, but I'm not actually sure that the emphasis is right.
Probably not. Atlantic Chase, I Napoleon, Western Front Ace, which is Great War in the Air, 1916-1918, Manila, Savage Streets, 1945, and Global War, World War II Worldwide were the top of that list of ones that were new this year. Interestingly, I think pretty much all of those except Atlantic Chase were newly released or had a new edition published since we did the survey last year. Because Napoleon is new, Manila Savage Streets is new. I think Global War is new since.
I was going to say Global War is new. So
and Vijayanagara, I think is. I'm trying to actually pronounce every syllable. I'm like actually magnifying the text on my screen to try and hit every syllable there, and I'm probably still messing it up. But anyway, that one I don't think that one had been released or was only barely released by the time we did the survey last year. So we have plenty of older games that are new on the survey that, again, differences in people responding to the survey or somebody finally got around to trying the game. But those I found it interesting that the ones that finished highest of the newcomers to the list this year were in fact the new games that wouldn't have been available as an option from last year. So that was something that did catch my attention. So
yeah, I know Napoleon is hot because it's only been on tables for a couple months max, and it made it on the list, whereas something like Atlantic Chase took longer to hop on.
But it's the Mr. President from last year, right? Because it surprises me that Mr. President's still on this list. I really thought, being new last year, it's the hot new thing, and it would kind of drop down or just disappear completely this year, but it's still way up there.
Well, what's interesting about that is it's just still set up from last year. I never see any photos of people playing Mr. President. Does that make sense? Like, that one surprised me. Not, the people who love Mr. President really, really love it, and I know people who think that it is just fantastic. It does not fit my lifestyle.
It doesn't fit my table. That's the problem with it. That's why you haven't seen it on the channel. I've got nowhere to put it.
But I feel like
tables, dude.
They're all separate though. You need one big giant table for that thing.
Just play it on the floor. Our knees and backs are fine.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea. I'll go to the local high school and see if I can borrow the gymnasium.
That might actually work.
Mike, you asked a good question of, do we have the years in which these were published or in some cases maybe re-released if it was an older one that finally came back into print. We do not have the data on the years the games were published, nor do we have the data on the designers. Both of those came up on the video stream. Quite frankly, that's more than Liz and I are going to go and pull as a part of the data dump for this. There are some ways to link to the BGG database and be able to programmatically pull some of that info in. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. And so that's, if somebody else wants to take the data set and do that, we are more than happy to let somebody play with the data set and pull those in, and give us that, be able, not give us that information, but give the audience the information of, hey, let's take a look at the top ranked games published in the last 5 years or whatever. Let's take a look at that. But somebody else can have to pull that data because I'm not manually looking up 400 something games to find it.
Well, what else are you doing, Brant?
Okay, Mr. Retired Guy. You tell me what else I would be doing.
I mean, Liz moved, so she wouldn't be able to do this until like December, but she could still do it in December.
Yeah, or we could get the retired guy to do it. Since
I'm trying to get the local high school to let me use their gymnasium. I can't do that.
In December, I'm going to be at peak Oath design.
Liz, I think the real question that everybody has for you about the new job is, are you going to be able to convince Leader Games to create a game with a name that has something other than 4 letters in it?
Because
like every one of their games is a 4-letter title.
I mean, I think that we should just make them do war games: Army, Navy.
You're going to have to use the initials of USAF and USMC to keep it at 4 letters at that.
Yeah,
point.
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be fine. I mean, what do I need? I'm perfectly happy with the 4-letter restriction. No, you know what? I actually don't know how serious they are about it being a hard restriction forever. I think it's like a thing that's been fun. I mean, who knows? We'll see.
They're just fans of 4-letter words.
The ones that I wish that we could title games, I don't think I'm allowed to do. So,
not if you want them sold in Target, you don't.
That'll just be the reviews of my games. Some 4-letter words.
Taking a look at at some of the other numbers, one of the other things that I did go and pull, and I had to restrict the data set a little bit for this, the way we scored the rankings, it's kind of college football ranking style. If you voted it in first place, it gets 5 points. Second place gets 4 points. Third place gets 3 points. And then we just add up the total number of points based on the overall rankings that we got. And we do also calculate an average because we use the average as kind of the tiebreaker. If we have 2 that had an identical score, we'll put the higher average one up there. The average is a tough one to use though, because that's subject to get pulled if there's very few votes for it. So if you've got something that only has 2 votes, but they're both in second place, it's got a high average of a 4 out of 5 for the average, but it's only going to have 8 total points in a ranking that, the number 1 had 97 points, and you're not even getting in the top 50 unless you're in double-digit total points.
Right.
So what I did was I limited the data set to only those games that got at least 10 votes. And there's 23 of those. But what I was curious about was, what was the highest average? And because at double-digit votes, you've got enough votes to really kind of look at the averages at that point and how things moved up or down relative to the total ranking versus the average ranking. If we do it by average, number 1 is Pax Pamir, 2nd edition. Number 2 is John Company, 2nd edition. RAF Battle of Britain 1940 stays number 3. That one didn't move. Our pronunciation nemesis, Vijayanagara. I'm going to try and pronounce it a different way every single time just to see if I can do that for an hour. That was number 4. Fields of Fire's number 5. That one stayed in the exact same position from the sum ranking versus the average ranking. Skies Above Britain, Pavlov's House, Ambush, and Fire in the Lake. Ambush, B-17, Queen of the Skies, and Fire in the Lake finish out the top 10. If we go by the average ranking, D-Day at Omaha Beach drops 9 spots. It's in a tie for 10th with Fire in the Lake. So that's actually not even the biggest drop though. Halls of Hegra has the biggest drop. If we go from point total to average, that one drops from number 5 all the way down to number 17. So we had some definite big swings there. Halls of Hegra drops from 5 to 17. Navajo Wars drops from number 12 all the way down to number 22. On the flip side, John Company jumps up from 9 to 2. Vijayanagara jumps from number 13 to number 4. And where's my other big jump in there was Ambush jumps from 15 all the way up to 8. So there are some of these that didn't get as many votes, but the votes they got were consistently higher. So that was another interesting data point, just playing around with it a little bit to kind of see the differences there. And again, I don't feel comfortable assessing averages unless we've got at least double-digit votes for the game. Because if we drop it down to just to kind of confirm that and comparing, if we drop the things down to the ones that got at least 5 votes, which is still a decent number of votes for this survey. Western Front Ace, which only had 5 votes. That one jumps all the way up to number 1. That one jumped up 29 spots. B-17 Fortress Leader jumps up 30 spots. RAF, the original RAF, the first RAF jumps up 30 spots. Pax Pamir is still up there in the top 5. And then White Tribe, Rhodesia's War 66 to 80 jumps up 32 spots. So it had exactly 5 votes. So
you know what I like about playing with this data though, is that I feel like this is a really good way to find maybe like hidden gems, at least to you, because if you mess around and like watch these different things change, you think, well, somebody really loves this game.
Yeah.
And then it makes you think, well, maybe I would really love this game because, this many people, 5 people can't be crazy, right?
Yeah. There are some cases where some games didn't get a ton of votes, but had some pretty high averages. Western Front Ace, B-17 Flying Fortress Leader, RAF, White Tribe, Falling Sky, PAX Renaissance 2nd edition, and there was another one in here that was only 5 votes. But those are all 5-vote games. So they only had 5 people voting for them that all had a 3.8 average or better, which meant that these are ones that people are all consistently voting in first and second place, maybe a stray third place vote in there, but they're all being voted consistently pretty high. Conflict of Heroes Awakening the Bear 2nd edition, which is the one that includes the solo purpose-built module, only got 6 votes, but it's 3.83 average. It jumps up 21 spots from its sum total ranking to where it is as an average for the ones that got at least 5 votes. So you're right. There are some in there that didn't get a ton of votes, but the people that voted for them really like them.
Also interesting is that I'm just kind of messing around this, look at the list now because you got me thinking. There's like almost 50 games on this list that the count, which is how many people put it in there, is 1.
Yes.
But it was their favorite game.
Yeah.
There's a lot of 1s and 2s. Yep.
But there's a lot of like one person voted for it, but they gave it 5 points because it's their favorite. And I'm curious. Also, there's some game I just remember seeing the data and I'm looking at it too. I Ain't Been Shot, Mum. Like 2 people gave this a 5. It's such a distinctive title. I have no clue about it, but like I'm curious now.
Okay, well that's Cyrano and one of the other guys from Friday Night.
It's a minis game. That's a minis game. It's one from the Two Fat Lardies guys over in the UK. So that's not even a hex encounter or tabletop kind of war game. That's a minis game.
Amazing.
Not a regular board game.
I ain't investing in that, but I love the title.
and there are a handful of minis games that did show up on here. Not just Mike, this is a solo and solitaire wargaming survey. Cyrano did not fill this out. He was bribing people to not fill it out.
That's probably true. I stand corrected.
I'm sure he probably was threatening excommunication for Saturday Night Fights for anybody that did. but it's
we'll never tell on them.
Yeah, there were some minis gamers that clearly showed their strength in here and there. Liz, it's a good point. It's easy to sort of dismiss the one game that only showed up once in 5th place somewhere as that's just something somebody was kind of filling space with, or maybe that is legitimately their 5th favorite or the one they played most recently. But yeah, for all of those people where there was one vote for something in first place, yeah, there's probably some interesting ones in that list of ones that only got the one vote. So
yeah,
but I did want to take a look at sort of the difference between some versus average and take a look at ones that were highly ranked among the people that did vote for it, as opposed to just accumulating a ton of potential down ballot mentions, even though they weren't up at the top. Look, we could parse the data and go through and look at which game got the most first place votes. Like that's crunchable. We could figure that out, but it's more than I'm going to do live on the podcast.
That's fair.
Mike, anything else jumping out at you as you're eyeballing the list here and sort of playing around, clicking through some of what's there?
One thing that stands out, and this stood out to me last year, and it was just a surprise last year, is Mrs. Thatcher's War. The fact that it ranks so high, or ranked so high last year, but also this year as well. And Ben Madison has a ton of solitaire-only games out there. And in my opinion, there's a couple I can think of that I think are a lot better than Mrs. Thatcher's War. But yeah, that one kind of stands out. I don't know why, it just does.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to, if somebody wants to pull designers in here, I'm sure we're going to see a ton of Madison. We're going to see a ton of Butterfield. He's going to be all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, I would love to see the designers broken up by designers. And there are a lot of Ben Madison games in here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think those jump out because you happen to be a Ben Madison fan. So you're going to see.
Well, who isn't?
Liz has other designers she prefers ahead of Ben.
What? No, Ben Madison and Wes Ernie for president. I'm telling you, it'll work.
President? Oh, no. All they know how to do is tower defense.
Exactly. That's what we need right now. That's what it's come to. It's states of siege.
Okay.
I would be really excited. We talked about this in the video too, but like how many of these are Butterfield? I bet it's a lot, and I also bet he deserves it.
Yeah. Well, he's done a lot. So
it's
absolutely.
As we do these surveys, it's just, I'm thinking too now, it's like it'd be interesting to compare more in detail this year's results with last year's results. So there's more, data mining we could do. And like I recommended last year that we should do all this data mining and then proceeded to do none of it. But like I said, there's a ton of things we could do with this information. I just don't know what. Maybe we should prioritize it, and maybe I'll do something.
There is a reason I am more than happy to allow the audience to help crunch those numbers.
Yeah,
that's fair.
And I am perfectly happy to accept the help from people, which is why I'm telling all kinds of folks, hey guys, if you want to help crunch the numbers, we would love to have the help, and we would love to have you be involved and give us your thoughts on there. So please do so.
We should at least have a podcast where maybe we get some people to talk about the. Oh, wait a minute.
The other kind of sort I'd be really interested in seeing is, obviously World War II would dominate this list. Like, I don't think it's even a question, but it would be super interesting to see this broken down by like historical period to see if this could tell us anything about like what times and places people are interested in.
Yeah, that might be.
Well, that brings up another point, Liz. Last year, I think you were chastising some of us for putting non-historical games on here. So were there a lot of non-historical games on the list?
It's not so much chastisement as an expression of disappointment at not reading the instructions. But I'm used to that.
Wait, did I see Space Empires 4X again?
Oh, I'm sure it is on there again. Whatever. Somebody put Root, the Clockwork expansion on here. I would really love to know about the history of the forest that that's based on. But you know what? Like, it's just going to happen. Like, you do a survey, people are going to put that in. As long as it's not like skewing the results in some sort of weird way, like, whatever.
And two spaces below that, the Plum Island Horror.
That is based on historical conflict. Look, there are even history notes in the game, okay?
I think Herman told me that last year at some point. Yeah, this is based on true events.
Yeah, well, this sort of cute affectation of the game, right, is that like they did put like notes as if it were a real event.
Yeah.
So I did grab a cut and paste of the first place votes from everybody and just pulled together a quick bar graph and had to really stretch it out to see it all. D-Day at Omaha Beach got 10 first place votes. That's the most number of first place votes. Right behind it, though, with 8 was PAX Premier second edition, and then John Company second edition got 7, and Mr. President got 6 first place votes, along with RAF Battle of Britain 1940 got 6 first place votes. Those are all the ones that got 6 or more. B-17 Queen of the Skies got 5 first place votes, and so did Skies Above Britain. So Skies Above Britain, which finished second overall in the overall ranking, didn't come in with a ton of first place votes. So there had to have been a lot of down ballot votes for that game, because it's only got the 5th most first place votes. So a lot of people would have been putting Skies Above Britain further down in the list. So, again, just an interesting point to kind of poke around at and look and see. So there's a surprising number of games with 2 first place votes in here.
I think it's kind of cool though. I mean, I know if this also happens for the People's Choice Top 200, but I feel like because this list is so new, and also because wargaming as a community, like we don't always think about it this way, but it is a pretty diverse community in terms of how long people have been into these, what mix of war and not wargaming they do. You're going to get just a really interesting skew of perspectives in the list, because we don't have like a canon yet either of things that you have to like for, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I definitely know what you mean there.
The lucky 13th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by our fantastic regimental patrons, who joined our Patreon at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Michael Sundberg, Andy J., Fred Stogg, Joseph Knorr, Hellcat6, Chet Bell, Stagger Wing, Kevin Bertram, Patrick Garrity, Mike Quigley, and Fred too. Their support of the Regiment of Strategy Gaming helps us bring you the best strategy gaming article, events, and this podcast. You can join us as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons. Cheers!
In terms of those descriptive stats for the people in the audience and who was playing how much of what, we do have some of those numbers also. Those are in the article that we posted for which ones were how high. One of the things that was interesting, we made the joke last year when we asked how long have you been wargaming. The upper limit was more than 25 years. And we all kind of laughed at that last year, because we should have realized that was going to dominate the answers. And we were right. It did completely dominate the answers. The other thing that was a little silly about it is we should have realized last year, like, that barely got you into the late 90s. Like, when we do this next year, that more than 25 years, the cutoff is going to get you back to the year 2000. And yes, we all just shriveled up a little bit inside. I get that. So we put a new upper bound on it, which was more than 40 years instead of just 25, but more than 40 years was still the over. It wasn't over half of the sample like it was last year, but it was still almost 35% of the respondents. The 76 people who responded to this were in the more than 40 years. The 25 to 40 was another 36 people. So almost not quite half, but pretty close to half of the overall sample is still 25 years and over. We can just segment them a little bit more because we have that new upper bound. We had 5 people who've been wargaming less than a year. So these are theoretically people that are new to wargaming since we even did the survey last year.
Yeah, which is cool.
So that is cool. From less than a year all the way up to 10 years, that's still, almost 75, 77 people out of, the 200 something that we had respond to. It's almost a third of them have been wargaming for fewer than 10 years, which is, again, it's cool. It's nice to have new blood in the hobby there. And I was telling some other folks this, where, from when I started going to Origins in 2005 until just a few short years ago, between the War College and the War Game program that we'd been running and any of the booths I was helping out at and working with, from the time I was, in my early 30s until just a few years ago, I was the youngest dude in the room all the time. There were no folks showing up younger than me to crowd into the room. And now they're all over the place, which is great. I love it. I love the fact that we've got a lot more younger folks that are discovering the hobby and getting involved in it. And quite frankly, I don't care how they found us. I'm just glad they're here. So that was, and I'm not just saying that because Liz is one of them. I'm just glad they're here.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a long time before I hit like the 20 to 40 range, but every year I just pack on another year. I'm also happy to see what I consider to be signs of growth and health in the hobby.
Then again, though, does this really tell us that information? I mean, maybe somebody who's only been wargaming for 5 years is 60 years old. Is that possible?
That's still growth.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's still new people.
It is growth, but I mean, as far as having younger people get into the hobby.
What would you rather do? Put them on an ice floe? Mike, that's inappropriate.
Put them on an ice floe. Let me write this down.
No.
That wasn't a suggestion, Mike.
Oh, okay.
This is a criticism.
So Mike, it is a good point that we don't know. So first of all, if you've been wargaming in the 40 and over mark, you are clearly in the 45 plus demographic, because I don't know a whole lot of folks wargaming at 2 years old. So if you're in that 40 and over demographic, which is still not quite a third, or about a third of our by percentage, just over a third of our sample. That's the old folks. Like, we know those folks are up there in age. Of the younger folks, like, we don't ask people's age as a part of this. We can infer a little bit from the how long have you been wargaming question. You're right. We may have people in that 1 to 3 year window. Of those 21 people, 5 of them might be over 40. And that's a possibility. They are still new to the hobby. They did still find us. They did still join the fun. And I do think it's probably the subject of a completely separate podcast, completely separate discussion, and maybe a separate attempt to gather some data from the participants in the hobby.
Well, I also want to point out too, though, like, if we're going to talk about people's average ages, I mean, I kind of feel like the age of board gamers skews up a little bit too. Like, I just looked randomly. Apparently, I don't know if this is actually true, but this is on something called Hero Time. I just looked up board game statistics because I thought it would be fun really quick. Somebody said, according to Meeple Mountain, they took some sort of data at some point.
Oh, then it's got to be true.
Of course. But apparently, there's most hobbies board gamers are 25 to 54, with 35 to 44 being the largest demographic.
So Meeple Mountain is actually a fairly large site that does a lot of board game coverage. Meeple Mountain also, I'm not sure, realizes war games exist.
But what I'm saying is that we can't complain about war gamers being old if comparatively board gamers are. I mean, all my students from the last few years would think that we're all ancient. So
yeah, thanks.
Sorry, you're old, everyone.
Kind of where I was going with that a little bit, though, is that I think, and look, we joked about this on the show that you and Fred and I did about the graying of the hobby. Like, that's been a consistent theme going back to the 70s, that we can find mentions of people talking about the graying of the hobby. I think one of the issues with wargaming, more so than casual board gaming, is that wargaming, you need a little bit of stability in your life in terms of available leisure time, some income, some, the space to be able to set up some of these games and be able to play them, that you don't always have when you're a 22-year-old in a crappy little apartment somewhere hustling 3 jobs to try and make the rent. So there is a certain point in your life you kind of have to be at to really be able to commit to the hobby. But I think where wargaming takes it a step beyond normal board gaming is that tie that we were specifically looking for in this survey, of that interest and engagement with history and historical events, and that historical, more than just pasting a theme onto something, but actually really trying to represent something in history. And I think the appreciation of that is something that kind of develops over time as well. So.
I also think it might be simpler than that, in that, I think you age out of the phase where you're in college, where it's super natural to just make friends because there are other people that are your age around you, living with you. You have to make an effort to go spend time with people who aren't your colleagues or your nuclear family.
You mean supernatural as 2 words, right? Because supernatural to make friends would be, a magical power.
Yes, indeed. If only. I remember it was just so easy to fall into friendships, right? When I was younger and I was in environments that were conducive to that. And so I think a wholesome, like normal, not clubbing, like waking hours thing to do that people think, oh, that'd be kind of nice, is go to a board game night. I think it makes a lot of sense that people who are kind of past the party years look for something to do and settle on board gaming. It's social. You can still have a beer. There's other people that are going to be in your age range there because people of all ages play.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really natural kind of life turn, especially because you might also be, if you have young kids at home, maybe you're playing, classic board games with them. And then you think, oh, what else is there? You go to Target, maybe you think about it. I can see it happening.
You can pick up Root on the shelves of Target. So,
there's so many variables. I mean, Brant was saying that, you're older, you got this disposable income, so you're going to war game more. But if you talk to the war gamers that have been doing it for 40 plus years, they started as teens. I mean, they didn't have any income. They found the space to play these games. I know I did. I used my mom's dining room table. So, fight for space to play it. But there's so many variables as to, I don't know how you would analyze this to even see. It's just, and back in the day too, you didn't have the distractions that are out there now, right? So a teen growing up in 1978, do I play a board game? Because I can't go log into Steam and play Skyrim.
I think there's, again, we're getting a little off the topic of the survey, but that's fine. Like this, the podcast is what we do. But I think there is occasionally a tendency among those of us that did start pretty young in our teen or even tween years in some cases, because we've got folks running around that have been wargaming since they were 8, and started in single digit years, that there's a tendency among those of us that do have a history back that far within wargaming to kind of a lot of our peers did also, because those were our friends growing up. And that, to us, that's just who we hung out with. And so the idea of somebody not coming to wargaming until they're 35 or 40 or 45 seems a little weird. Just like, well, why weren't you doing this as a kid? But I do think that there's quite a few of those folks out there. And again, without really kind of digging into it, it's hard to know. One thing.
Although, I mean, what is the classic joke now about like people who become dads in their 40s? Like there's 2 pathways. You can either become a World War II enthusiast or start smoking meat.
Yeah. Yeah. Those memes have been floating around.
Or both. You could do both.
I'm just saying, war games are a natural pairing with middle-aged adulthood.
Well, and then to bring us back full circle, which is kind of what I was getting into at the beginning of this discussion, is what Brant said again is, maybe the 50 and 60, or like you're saying, Liz, the 50 and 60 plus people, now they have the time and they're looking for other things to do and get into. And okay, there's World War II games out there. I've never tried those. And that's where we're seeing this. Okay, there's these 5 years or less war gamers could be some of these people that are smoking meat and playing World War II games.
Liz, there was something you said about sort of, as you move out of your clubbing days and start looking for other things to do, that kind of the way in which you phrased it made me go back and relook at the how long have you been wargaming data, because this was something that I didn't even think about until the way you were saying that, and it sort of popped in my head. We've got 26 folks that have been wargaming for either less than a year or in the 1 to 3 year mark. So that's 26 people that have picked up wargaming post-pandemic.
Yes.
So, I mean, some of those may be pandemic converts, folks that picked it up because they were out of other things to do, thanks to, all of us being locked down and not being able to go out and socialize. So let me throw a war game on the table and take a look at what I got. So,
I mean, there are weirder things to start doing during a pandemic. I mean, that's what made me start a podcast. So.
One of the other sets of stats, how much of your total board gaming is war and historical gaming? So we all know there's a bunch of us that play all kinds of stuff. Mike and I have joked for many years about how voluminous our RPG collections are alongside of our war games. And God help us if we start trying to count PDFs. But of the people that, and again, these were optional questions. So if folks are looking at the stats and they don't add up to the full number of people that responded to the overall survey, that's why people were free to skip these questions at the end. But how much of your total board gaming is war and historical gaming? Almost 10% said all of it. Almost it was 28% and change said over 75%. So we've got, what's interesting is in a survey where we're sort of aiming for war gamers, a little over a third of them are 75% or more of wargaming is their regular diet. And we actually had a pretty large chunk 17, almost 18%. It was under 25% of their total board gaming is war and historical gaming. And another 22% and change are below 50%. So we got a pretty good spread of folks for whom wargaming is a part of a more robust board gaming diet, which I thought was interesting also. Now, we did ask folks what percentage of their gaming was solo for different kinds of games, for board gaming, RPGs, minis gaming, and folks were free to answer NA if they didn't really play any of those kinds of games, and that was fine. I have not crunched any of the numbers on those responses yet. So I'll get to them at some point. I just haven't got there yet as of the time we are recording this. So
yeah, that's super interesting. I would actually put myself, I'm probably wargaming and historical gaming a little over 50% of the time right now.
Yeah. So you'd be in that 50 to 75%.
Yeah. And I actually like that people are splitting, because basically what that means to me is, again, like when we talk about growth of the hobby and like health of this sector of the hobby, the more crossover there is, the easier it is to bring more people in.
Yeah.
So,
and I think one of the easiest places to get folks into wargaming is to get folks that are already comfortable with other kinds of board gaming. And now, instead of, the Hanseatic weed orgy, now we are flipping over to, let's do more shooty bangy kinds of things. So
yeah, I mean, war games are just games.
Yeah, they are. One of the other ones, when we asked folks, where did you find out about this survey? Board Game Geek ran away with that by a huge margin. Over 90 people said they found out about it from Board Game Geek, whereas the next highest one, Liz, was actually your channel, but it was only 24 people from your channel. And so I think that also ties back into what James Buckley found in his survey about where people find out about board gaming content and wargaming content and news and such. Board Game Geek is still a dominant information source. Even as much as people might complain about Board Game Geek, that is still where a ton of people find out about these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I posted this in the One Player Guild over on BGG because I knew that there would be people who would have something to say.
Well, I wonder if it's not slightly skewed towards BGG in the case of this specific survey, because we're also asking people to paste BGG links into the survey as a part of their responses, that it would kind of make sense that the people that are already okay using Board Game Geek, cutting and pasting those responses, that's where we would have recruited them from. And we may have had other people that found out about it from another source, saw that we were asking for URLs from BGG to be pasted in and said, forget that, I'm not even filling it out. And so we lost them as potential participants because they weren't even willing to engage with BGG to cut and paste those links.
It's just possible. A website. I said, Cataly. No, I'm kidding. No, I do think BGG is. I do think that I like that we asked for the URLs in part. We've talked about this before because it forces specificity in what exactly you were trying to tell us you were voting for. I don't know a better way to do that right now. And, when we come up with one, that'd be nice. But I also think that if you are playing enough war games and enough historical games that you can name 5 of them for your favorite solo ones for a survey, you have been on BGG. There's no way on this earth.
I agree 100%. I say what you want about BGG, but it's a fantastic resource. It really is. And the data in there may not all be 100% accurate, and I guarantee it's not, but it's a great resource.
Yeah. I think as a reference tool, it's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah.
As a discussion tool, perhaps less so.
Yeah, no, I really just want to look at what are the postings, are there rules questions? I don't really use the forums for anything serious at this point because they're just too spicy for me.
They sometimes can be. One of the other things that we discussed on the video, but I also want to bring up here because I'm curious about Mike's reaction to them a little bit as well. I did slice the data set up based on how long people had reported that they had been wargaming. And I cut them into 3 distinct slices. I took the folks that were the 40 and over slice because that was the biggest piece of the pie anyway. I combined the folks that were the 10 and under group. And then I had that middle group, the folks that had been between 10 and 40, which was 2 of the blocks that you could reply to for how long have you been wargaming. And based on those 3 different sort of veterancy groups, if you will, I took a look at what were the numbers based on those three groups for which ones came up the highest. So if we had limited the survey to only those folks that were wargaming for 40 or more years, B-17 Queen of the Skies was the highest ranked game, tied with Skies Above Britain. And then D-Day at Omaha Beach actually drops to third. Now, it's only 1 point off the top two, but it does drop down to third. And then Solitaire ASL and RAF Battle of Britain 1940. And then D-Day at Tarawa Beach is the sixth one up there. So it's a lot of the same ones that were at the top of the aggregate rankings, just shuffled around in order a little bit. But a lot of the ones that the folks in the 40 and older group, 40 years or more, not necessarily 40 and older, although they're going to be all over 40 years old. A lot of those are still the ones that you find at the top of the survey overall. The youngsters, however, if we go to the 10 years or fewer wargaming, PAX Premier 2nd Edition is the top ranked game among that group. Skies Above Britain, D-Day at Omaha Beach, Atlantic Chase, Halls of Hegra, Pavlov's House, and Fire in the Lake. That's your top seven. And then after that, the scores start to drop off. You also find Vijayanagara. I'm going to commit to pronouncing it a different way every single time. And then Mr. President are in that list for the folks that were among the 10 years or fewer wargaming crowd. Fewer of the games that we would consider sort of traditional hex encounter, shooty bangy kinds of stuff, but still, like D-Day at Omaha Beach is still in that list.
Yeah.
Of the folks in the middle crew, folks between 10 and 40 years worth of wargaming, RAF Battle of Britain 1940, D-Day at Omaha Beach, Fields of Fire, John Company 2nd Edition, Mr. President, I, Napoleon, Skies Above Britain, Navajo Wars, and then Labyrinth, which I found it interesting that Labyrinth was as high on their list compared to the others, but I guess that's the crew that was sort of, of deployable age right through most of the action in Labyrinth. So maybe that's something that resonates more with that audience, potentially.
It makes sense.
I don't really know. I did not go and take a look to see among games that got more than like 2 votes, right? Because it's very easy to skew something with only 2 or 3 votes. I didn't go and look and see if there were games that were only chosen by people within a certain, veterancy boundary. That might be an interesting thing to go look at. Like the only people that voted for this were the people in the 10 and under group, and it still got 9 votes or something like that. That might be an interesting thing to go look at, but I didn't do it. Of the 3 different boundary groups there were 7 games that showed up on all 3 groups lists, and they're all fairly close to the top of each of those lists. In alphabetical order: Ambush, D-Day at Omaha Beach, Fields of Fire, Halls of Hegra, Mr. President, Navajo Wars, and Skies Above Britain. So Navajo Wars is interesting because it doesn't show up in like the top 10 or top 15 aggregate across the survey, but it shows up in every one of those age boundaries. Then they're not truly age boundaries, but you guys get what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. The other thing that's interesting though is that Fields of Fire shows up in all of them because we even discussed it last year on the podcast of which one of these solo games would you not want to give people for their first game? And we all jokingly said there's no way in hell we'd turn somebody over to Fields of Fire. But, that 10 and under, the 10 years and under crowd of wargamers, Fields of Fire shows up on their list. And not like down at the bottom of it. It's still close to the top, which is interesting. So Mike, what do you think? Any thoughts or reactions to that?
But that's what I was saying. Those 10 people could all be retired lawyers and they love those rule books like that. No, it's interesting that you broke it down that way. And it kind of makes me, again, another idea, and maybe Ardwolf's listening. This will be a counter clipping show topic he can run with. But Liz said it earlier, it's like, you call yourself a war gamer. Well, then by God, you better like game X, Y, or Z. So, what are those games? But the way this breaks down from what you just read, I don't really get a feel for there's any other than ASL, which, it's
a lifestyle, not a game.
Right. It seems to be a pretty good mix of games, newer, older. I don't know. It's kind of surprising.
Well, that shared pool of 7 games that showed up in all 3 of those, longevity boundaries, Ambush is an older game. been around for a while, but the original Ambush can still be found on the secondary market at a reasonable cost. It's the expansions that are really hard to find.
Yeah, I confess I totally just looked Ambush up on Noble Knight, and it's currently like $80, which is a lot. But I mean, if you're buying stuff on Kickstarter, it's really not a lot.
Well, but if you go look at Ambush on like the BGG marketplace, you can probably find one for like $20-$25. I mean, you're going to find it for less through eBay or the Constant Marketplace on Facebook. The original Ambush is not that hard to find. It's the expansion modules that are a real butt kicker.
Don't go looking for a Battle Hymn. Yeah, that's
Battle Hymn. You're shelling out a car payment or two. D-Day at Omaha Beach is, it's the top one on the survey overall, and it's not a surprise that lots of different people would find that one. Fields of Fire, I think, is a little surprising that it shows up everywhere, given the complexity of it as it's been presented thus far. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Fields of Fire when the new rule book and the new playbook get published, which should happen before next year's survey that we do. Halls of Hegra is a new game. I mean, that one's only a year and a half, 2 years old at this point, and is not, a traditional hex encounter shooty bangy looking kind of thing. It's more of it's not a storytelling game, but it is a little more story driven. Liz, help me out here. What's a better way to describe it?
I would say the Halls of Hegra it's a descendant of it's a siege game.
Yeah.
It takes something like Pavlov's House and kind of expands on it a bit more and abstracts it a bit more. David likes the stuff super granular in terms of his history. But I mean, it's descended from, I would say, States of Siege.
Yeah, it's a tower defense game.
It's a tower defense game. And it's a very, very good one.
Yeah.
It's highly engaging. It brings in bag building and a little bit of card management, which I think, even if you're just getting like little bonus cards and stuff, I think people who play a lot of mainstream hobby board games recognize a lot of what's going on in Halls of Hegra. I think it makes it a really nice crossover.
Yeah.
While still being historically
Mr. President is on all three of those groups lists, but I think, again, this is one of those, I don't know if the new hotness hasn't worn off or because it's the only game of its type out there really right now that you can easily find that puts you in a little more of a sort of command and control, vast political array of things. If that changes, being a little more unique may be what's attracting eyeballs to it, possibly. Navajo Wars is the one that really jumps out to me. It's not super new. It's not super old. It's the only sort of 19th century cowboy and Indian sort of thing. It's the only one that's outside of a significant conflict that we would otherwise recognize. That
it did have a reprint within the last couple of years.
It did. But look, between Ambush and D-Day to Omaha Beach and Fields of Fire and Skies Above Brit, like World War II is dominating this list, which we kind of expect. There's no Civil War game in there. There's no Revolutionary War game in there. There's no Napoleonic game in there. Navajo Wars really jumps out as a bit of an outlier in there.
That's what I was saying. It's like, like Liz was saying, where's the canon games that they should be in? Where's the Civil War? Where's Napoleon?
Yeah.
What's going on here?
And that's not to say that there aren't any on the list anywhere. It's just that this list of 7 were the 7 games that were all named by people in every one of those longevity brackets.
I will tell you that if you are into the People's Choice Top 200 that kind of spawned this list, Comancheria and Navajo Wars are traditional long-running holdouts on earlier versions of that list.
That's cool.
And that's those are games that were popular with large chunks of the regular, as it were, solo gaming community.
Okay.
And so I suspect that also part of that popularity is because if you're looking up good recommendations for solo games and you're looking at things that aren't from like last year, you're still going to see those names mentioned, and they're still kind of mainstream solo hot recommendations sometimes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Another way that somebody could maybe slice this list, and maybe I'll do it down the line. I'm not doing it anytime soon, and certainly not tonight while we're sitting here on the call. I sliced the list looking for the ranking based on separating folks by how long they'd been wargaming. I think it might be interesting to also slice up the list. What are the top 10 or top 15 based on what percentage of your gaming is wargaming. Do the folks that are hardcore wargamers have a different top 5, top 10 than the people that are only, 25% wargaming amongst their total tabletop gaming diet? It might be interesting to see how that compares. It's not one I'm going to sit here and try to do while we're talking on the podcast, because that's a few extra steps in the data crunching. But that might be one that folks would enjoy looking at and seeing. So an idea for a future research project. We're a little over an hour on this. I don't want to keep us up too late. I don't want to overtax the audience. As we look at kind of what we learned from last year compared to what we saw this year, and some thoughts from last year going into this year, Mike, I'm going to give you a second to think about it while I hit Liz with this first. But sort of what do you think about the comparison from last year to this year? What jumped out at you as a bit of a surprise? What did not surprise you at all? And what do you think? Make a prediction for next year.
Ooh, okay. I was fascinated by the jump in some older games, like way up the list for reasons that I cannot discern. So, for example, B-17 Queen of the Skies. Not that it's a bad game because it's a classic, but why the jump? So basically what I'm curious about, what I'd like to see is I hope that we get more votes next year. So if you're listening to this and you didn't vote and you have opinions about things on this list, then the obvious solution is to vote next year. But as we continue to see maybe shifts in demographics of people voting for this, and maybe expansion in some areas, I would just be really, really interested to see which games that are in the kind of old out of print range continue to hang, because I think that it's cool, but I'm also not sure how many people still actually have Ambush out there.
That's a very good point. I would love to know too how accessible. Can you still get some of these games? And just glancing at the list, I kind of think probably most of them you can, but but
you got to go source it and you got to pay up.
Right. But it would be interesting to know that.
Yeah. And maybe that's something that we throw into some of the optional questions for next year is there one of these that became a grail game for you that you had to go hunt down? Or, did you pay at least 3 figures for any of these on the secondary market or something? There's a couple of different ways we could ask those questions. We could throw some ideas out right now, and I'll go back and listen to the podcast next July as we're prepping next year's survey to try and remind myself of what we said we were going to do again. But Mike, do you have any kind of prediction for next year? Something you think might happen or might not happen for next year?
Well, after seeing last year compared to this year, no. It seems like anything may go. I am really curious, though, for next year. Burning Banners was released this year, as was the reprint of Divine Right. And I'm wondering if fantasy wargaming, if either one of those or both are going to show up next year on this list.
Not if Liz has anything to say about it.
Well, we're throwing aside the historical thing here because that's out the window.
No, go make your own list. Actually, I would be super down. Like, Brant, do you do a sci-fi list, or have you just talked about it?
We don't do a specific one, and this is where we had joked last year about war and historical gaming. Like those games are war games, even though they're not historical games.
Right.
But the fact that we bill it as war and historical may be part of why people don't put Freedom in the Galaxy or Divine Right or
because that's the intention of this list, is to suss out the historical stuff. Yeah. But I would be very, very interested in seeing a sci-fi pairing. Like a sci-fi fantasy war games list, because that would be great. Yeah. Like Dawn of the Zeds would be on there. Yes. Undaunted Callisto would be a good fit for that. That's recent. Things like Plum Island Horror would fit on there. Things like Space Empires 4X would fit on there. Like, it'd be really cool to see.
Yeah, the Talon universe stuff. There's a bunch of different things that would fit that mold. I think one of the things that I do want us to be a little careful about, and I've not received this feedback directly, although I could kind of feel some of the eye rolls coming through some of the social media posts where we'd put out, recruiting for these endeavors. At a certain point, our audience is going to get survey fatigue, right? At a certain point, they're going to get sick of filling these things out for us. And,
I know.
And so there's only so many times we can go to the well.
It's awful.
Yeah. There's just so many times we can go to the well for these things, particularly, we try to be respectful of the audience's time and not overtax them on the number of questions we ask. And that's one of the reasons why, if you take a look at this survey and any of the other ones that we pop out there through Armchair Dragoons, we're kind of cautious about how many questions we ask. And we let folks know, here's how many total questions. Here's how many questions are in this section as you go through the different sections. So we are trying to be careful about not dumping people into, these big, long 120 question academic surveys. We're not trying to, we did try to do that back in the summer, but that was a different, specific case where it was an academic survey. But for these sort of fun, more lighthearted ones that are still trying to get some information but not go overboard, whenever possible, we want to keep it to 10 items or less. For something like this, we got to go a little more than that, but we don't want to go any more than we have to, just because we don't want to burn out the audience on these things.
I'm just genuinely curious about what that would look like. And I don't know, as somebody who complains about my stuff not showing up on the People's Choice, like, I understand that for others as well.
Yeah. And it may be that it takes a little bit of time for Burning Banners or the reprint of Divine Right to grab some attention and run with. The other thing is we're specifically asking people about their solo gaming habits, not their overall gaming habits. So it may be that somebody loves them some Divine Right or loves them some Burning Banners, but they actually have a group they can play it with and they're not playing it solo. Those folks wouldn't be a candidate for that kind of question. I also think if we ask about like sci-fi and fantasy, there's no way we're going to get a top 5 out of people. We'd be happy to get a top 3 out of people, I think, just because there aren't as many of them.
Just based on what I've seen, though, honestly, looking at, if you're in general, war gamers, there's a clear dividing line between war gamers and sci-fi fantasy gamers. I mean, if you look at like Gary on Ardwolf's Lair, when he does war game stuff, he's got a certain crowd and he gets a huge number of views. But when he posts something that's RPG, fantasy, or something like that, look at the difference in numbers of who's looking at that. Much lower than what he gets for his war game stuff. So it's two completely different groups of people, I believe, that like those games. There's a little bit of overlap, but not a whole lot.
The interesting counterpoint to that, Mike, is something that I've noticed with our site, and we'll kind of wrap up around this thought. But when we do cover some RPG stuff and some lighter non-shooty bangy stuff as well, we had the big long Space Corp AAR that Van Zykat did for us 5 years ago, whatever it was. We've covered some RPG stuff recently, particularly a couple of Free League releases between Blade Runner and One Ring and Twilight 2000, although Twilight 2000 is a special case because of the war-themed overlap with that. We don't see a significant drop-off in traffic between the RPG content or the non-heavy wargame content versus the heavy wargame content. The type of article, whether it's an AAR or the news or a podcast or a review or an unboxing, is far more indicative of the relative number of eyeballs than it is what the game or topic is about in terms of the audience that we attract. All right, wrapping up the survey here. Last thoughts. Liz, any last thoughts on this survey overall as we wrap up the podcast here?
Just that I can't wait to do it again next year.
Yeah, so I think August worked out as a good time frame for us. So I think we prep it in July. We have the questions ready to go. So 1 August will launch, 31 August will close. We'll crunch the numbers. Early September we'll have some results. Mike, closing thoughts.
Just that the next time we do this podcast, if I could get these results a little earlier.
Yeah. I'll give you 10 hours instead of 10 minutes. I'll give you 60 times the amount of notice.
Plenty of time.
Yeah. I will make it a point to get things to you earlier, and I apologize, and I'm a horrible person for not giving those to you sooner. The flip side of it is we got a little more raw reaction from you as well.
Right. I mean, it's not a big deal, and it's seeing it for the first time. So yeah.
Come on, man. This is mentioned in dispatches. We don't prepare for these things.
We really don't. Another poll we should take, I guess. Should we prepare for this?
Yeah, no kidding.
Nah.
All right. So folks, down at the bottom of this episode, you'll see the links to all the different coverage that we've got for this year's solo wargaming survey. Again, there's the Geek List on BGG. There's Liz's video. There's our podcast. We've got our articles that are going to be filtering out. So there's a couple of different places where you can see what was discussed and the different rankings and the different data. And again, I want to offer the call out there that if you've got some particular question about the data that you would like to dig into the data and poke around with, please feel free to ask us. We can make some of the data available to you. You don't get the email addresses of the people that replied. We're going to strip that out. Sorry, you don't get that one. But if you're interested in sort of comparing some of the other stats that we've got, or if you want to take the list and go back and add the publication dates or the designers or something, like, hey, we're all for it. We got no problem helping share that. And let us know the kind of crunching that you do for those numbers, because we're curious what kinds of questions other people might have and could get answered from that. So please feel free to reach out and let's collaborate on that. Otherwise, audience, thank you all very much for sticking with us through this episode and this discussion around the solo wargaming survey. We'll be back next week with Mike. I think we're doing the worst of wargaming next week, aren't we?
I'll be unprepared again because I didn't know that.
I think it is. If it's not next week, it's the week after, where we're going to be talking about the worst things out there in wargaming, some of the worst games, some of the worst graphics, some of the worst rule books, some of the worst whatevers. We're going to slag on stuff for an hour straight. And
before we sign off on this one, the one final thing about this, we didn't say it, and we darn well should have said it. Thank you to everyone who voted. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
That is an awesome final thought. We will leave it there. Audience, we appreciate you. We will catch you next time on another episode of Mentioned in Dispatches.